This week I sculpted a polymer clay dice holder in the shape of a classic D&D monster, a mimic. Let's get started. I start by taking some Sculpey Ultralight clay and adding it to the inside of the chest to help bulk it out and add some volume. Next I start to bulk out his tongue when I realize these hardware pieces are in my way, so I quickly have them removed and then get back to shaping his tongue. Once I have all of the insides bulked out the way I want, I put it in the oven for its first bake. After he's baked, I add a little layer of bacon bond to the ultralight clay, and then I apply some Super Sculpey Primo in a dark red color to avoid having to paint the inside of his mouth. Next, I use a ball tool to add some texture to the inside of his mouth. Now that the inside of his mouth is done, I use a slightly brighter red color to cover his tongue. Using a double-pointed knitting tool, I create a little bit of a line down the center of his tongue, and then I add some texture and detailing. Using the same color Primo clay, I start to add a largest noodle of clay to the bottom and top of the chest to create some gums for his teeth. Once those clay noodles are in place, I blend it in to help remove the seam line in the chest and make it look a little bit more seamless. I then add some more fleshy bits to the inside of his mouth by adding some triangles and blending it in, and then adding some texture. Then to add some symmetry, I repeat the same process on the other side. For the teeth, I pre-bake some T-shaped pieces of clay, and then using some bacon bond, I press them gently into the soft, gummy clay that I had placed where his teeth would go. I wasn't really happy with the outside of the chest and how it looked, so I covered the entire thing in some Super Sculpey clay, being sure to push the clay down into all the nooks and crannies to avoid getting air bubbles and preventing cracks. Now that he's completely covered, I take some ball-shaped pieces of clay and I place them right on top to create his eyes, blending him into that base layer of clay. Next, using the edge of my spoon-shaped tool, I create a slight indentation in the ball of the eye to create some eyelids. My mimic is going to have some tentacles coming out of the chest, so I use a ball tool to mark where I want those tentacles to come out. Now that I have the tentacle spaces marked, I use my needlepoint tool to create the planks of the wood on the chest, and then I also use that tool to create the texture of each of the planks. Now that the planks of the chest are completely done, I start to take some tentacle-shaped pieces of clay and I place them in my pre-marked spots on the chest and then I blend it in. Then I take some small pieces of clay and I place them right around the edge where the tentacle is coming out to create some wood splintery pieces coming from the chest. And because sometimes I get a little bit distracted with what I'm doing, I stop doing the tentacles and I move on to making the little silver edgings where the metal would be on the chest, and I place them right where I want them to go on the chest. The curved parts of the metal going around the top of the chest was a little bit more challenging to make it look as clean as I wanted, but I did the best I could with what I had. Once the metal plates were in place, I used a little tiny circle cutter tool that I have, and I mark where I think the metal bolts would go to hold those plates in place. Now that the metal plates are completely finished, I go back to my tentacles and I place them in the pre-marked tentacle spots, shaping them in swirly, curly, tentacly shaped tentacles. I definitely wanted to make sure that each of the tentacles and how they swirled and curled were visually different to add some variety to each of the shapes. Once I finished the 4 side tentacles, I decided that the back tentacle was just a little bit too small, so I replace it with a slightly longer tentacle and then I blend it in and then add some shape. Then I finish off each of the tentacles by adding some wood splinters and chips coming off of the panels where the tentacles are breaking out of the planks. Once I was happy with the breaking of the wood panels detailing, I put it in the oven for its final bake. Onto the painting, which is my favorite part because it just brings the whole thing to life. I start by painting the wood planks a deep dark brown color. For the metal areas of the chest, I painted a gunmetal grayish color. After studying different types of mimic treasure chests, I decided to go with this deeper purpley color for the eyes because for some reason it just really stood out to me. Moving on to the tentacles, I didn't want them to be the same kind of purple as the eyes, but I wanted them to be in the same kind of color scheme, so I went with this kind of magenta-y purpley color. At this point, I decided I really didn't like the dark gray metal pieces, so I paint over it with this metallic-y silvery paint. And once I finish the finishing details, I think he's ready for the Glamour Shots. And there you have it, a pet mimic dice holder. Shout out to my husband for giving me the idea to turn him into a dice holder in the first place, because he was originally just going to be a pet mimic. I hope you enjoyed watching me make him. I'll see you next time, and remember to stay crafty.